In yesterday's frantic press conference, he obviously used that to grant moral equivalencies to Nazis and white supremacists. And that's why what happened yesterday for so many people across this country in America seemed to do such grave violence, not only to the institution of the presidency, but also, of course, to this country. The United States sometimes it's been painful, but we've been in a constant long march towards equality. And yesterday, it's almost as if the president held up a stop sign and stopped history in its tracks. I think it's safe to say that none of us have ever seen anything like what happened yesterday.
No, it was extraordinary, and it was despicable, and it was something that we suspected around this table yesterday, and people have suspected across the country for the last several days, that the president's initial statement on Saturday about Charlottesville, what it was actually in his heart when he said many sides were to blame and there's hate on many sides, and that the statement he put out and made on Monday was one that he was forced into and pressured into. And yesterday, when he was unleashed and he was allowed to take questions, he repeated what he actually meant, Joe.
And it's really important for people to understand that are just waking up this morning that may not have seen everything that happened. His own staff members were lied to yesterday as they went down there. They thought they were going to be talking about infrastructure. I'm sure you can look at the pictures of the chief of staff seeming to be in mourning, thinking that he had been lied to, Elaine Chao had been lied to, everybody, Mnuchin had been lied to, and he just went on this wild tirade. And there you have a picture of the chief of staff who's doing everything he can to try to bring order to a White House and to a president who refuses to take that order. And it really is despicable, and that's why, and I think the most telling thing is the reaction. The reaction has been harsh from not only across America, but across the world. You've had people like Marco Rubio calling the president out by name, Cory Gardner calling the president out by name. A lot of Republican congressmen have been doing the same thing. John McCain, Ben Sasse. But of course, not so strange is the fact that you had David Duke and other white nationalists actually praising the president of the United States yesterday for his words, and why not? He has now officially become the president of the white nationalist, not only of America, but also of the white nationalist movement. David Duke saying, "Thank you, Mr. President, for your courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville." Well, David Duke, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, Klan members, they stand on one side, and apparently the rest of America and the world stands on the other, Willie. The president has chosen sides, and it is very clear. Not only morally, especially morally, but also politically, he has chosen the wrong side. It is now up to the rest of us to figure out why he did that exactly. Is he just a bigot? Is he just a racist? And what we're going to do about it, because I can tell you the one thing that does not seem to be an option for GOP legislators, GOP donors, conservative editorial writers, is indifference, or the granting Donald Trump the sort of moral equivalency that Donald Trump granted Nazis, white supremacists, and Klans members.
There was
unbelievable. Just
Joe,
unbelievable.
there was an extraordinary moment on Saturday in Charlottesville when David Duke was being interviewed, and he turned to the camera and he said, as if chiding the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, "Look in the mirror, Mr. President, and remember who put you in office." That was David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, reminding the president and pressuring the president. And I have to say, Joe, it looked yesterday like the president complied with that, like he remembered who put him in office, and he checked himself without giving full condemnation to the KKK of all groups. Joe,
there are a lot of people who voted for him that aren't Nazis, that aren't white nationalists. There are a lot of people across the country that are asking, what the hell did I vote for? This is not what I voted for. I didn't want a Clinton or a Bush in the White House, but I sure as hell didn't want a Duke in the White House. And that's what they've got.
We got a big group here to talk about this on this Wednesday, August 16th. Mika has the morning off. She'll be back with us tomorrow. With us, we've got the host of Deadline White House at 4 o'clock here on MSNBC, former communications director for President George W. Bush, Nicole Wallace, veteran columnist and MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, NBC News chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson, MSNBC political analyst and professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Policy and former Democratic congressman from Tennessee, Harold Ford Jr., MSNBC political analyst and the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, Michael Steele, and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian John Meacham joining us from Nashville. So, President Trump fanned the flames of controversy around the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, where white nationalists, white supremacists, and other affiliated groups marched this weekend, chanting Nazi slogans, and a woman was killed and nearly 24 others injured when a car allegedly driven by one of those white nationalist marchers plowed into counter-protesters. A day after singling out the KKK, neo-Nazis, and other hate groups, the president reverted to his original statement that multiple sides were to blame for the violence. He explained his delay in condemning those groups while adding those marching alongside them included, quote, many fine people.
There was no way of making a correct statement that early. I had to see the facts, unlike a lot of reporters.
Nazis were there.
I didn't know David Duke was there. I wanted to see the facts. And the facts, as they started coming out, were very well stated. In fact, everybody said his statement was beautiful. If he would have made it sooner, that would have been good. I couldn't have made it sooner because I didn't know all of the facts. Frankly, people still don't know all of the facts. The first statement was made without knowing much other than what we were seeing. The second statement was made after, with knowledge, with great knowledge. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt? What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute, I'm not finished. I'm not finished, fake news. That was a horrible day.
On the same level as neo-Nazis.
I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest, and very legally protest, because, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this, there are two sides to a story.
So, Nicole, I don't really know where to start with that. There were so many misstatements, half-truths, and lies there. You could even start with, of course, the fact that he didn't know that David Duke was there. Yeah. Of course he did. He watches TV all the time, and he knew David. But this isn't the first time he's lied about David Duke. He's made a livelihood over the past year and a half of lying about David Duke. Tell me, what do Republican activists, Republican leaders, Republican donors, people who've been in the Republican Party their entire life do at this point? And how much longer can people like Elaine Chao and Steve Mnuchin and General Kelly, who I'm grateful is in there, but how much longer can they stand by a man in good conscience without being branded as an enabler of a white supremacist?
Well, 15 minutes. I mean, if they don't resign en masse this morning, they're forever tainted with the stench of what he did yesterday. And the ship has long sailed where any one of them can justify to outside audiences that they stay because the threats to our nation are so grave. You and I both know a lot of people with that rationale who make the case that if you saw what I saw, if you appreciate that I know what I'm doing, you'd understand the compromise that I make in terms of his moral and ethical lapses. And I guess that was one thing when he was simply talking about grabbing women between the legs, or when he was blowing up all the norms of sort of the dignity of the office of the presidency. But he's now given safe harbor to Nazis, to white supremacists. You know, what he's done now is something you can't put back in the toothpaste tube. And he has now stained all of the good and decent people, many of whom are there for the right reasons. So I think they're past the point where they get out without doing any harm to their personal reputations. And I think that you know, what do Republicans do? They never do anything. They tweet their outrage 140 characters at a time, and then they make up some baloney about, well, tax reform would be good. But, you know, we're so far beyond that. He's so disgraced, not just the Republican Party, but the country. People with kids can't watch TV with their kids anymore. I was on a JetBlue plane. My son said, Mommy, why'd they drive into a crowd full of people? And I said, sometimes good guys get hurt fighting the villains. There are not two sides in this. There are hideous, hateful enemies of America, enemies of freedom, and there were people exercising their free speech. But he's a disgrace.
And there's no, I agree with you, unfortunately. For a very long time, I believed what Robert Gates had said and what many other people had said, that even if you didn't vote for this president, even if you were discouraged by this president, if you went in to work for the administration, you were doing your patriotic duty to this country with the hope of maybe bringing some moderating force or maybe a little bit of knowledge to the President of the United States. We're past that now. If you're working in the White House.
He's made fools of all those people. That was a noble pursuit.
Right.
It was more than I could stomach, but I tried not to judge people who'd made that calculation. That ship has sailed. He stood before God and country and made fools of everybody that was willing to sort of apply a gray screen to the equation, sort of the gray area.
And you take somebody like Elaine Chao, who has worked in Washington for quite some time for some honorable men and women, has been honorable herself. How does she stay working for a white supremacist? How does she stay working for somebody
on television.
who's who maligns her husband on television, who basically finds common cause with neo-Nazis and tries to say that all sides do it? What if you're Steve Mnuchin? What if you're Gary Cohn and you actually had a good reputation in New York in the financial community beforehand? What if you're Dina Powell? What if you're any of these people? Are you really going to stay in and continue to work for a white supremacist, or at least someone who actually gives comfort to white supremacists and neo-Nazis? Jon Meacham, let me go to you. Well, I also want to say really quickly before I talk to you, John, this goes with donors too. Make no, just make no mistake of it. If you are a donor, and from this day forward, if you write a check to Donald Trump, a day will come where you may have to explain to your children, to your grandchildren, to your friends, why you spent your money propping up someone who defends white supremacists, someone who defends neo-Nazis, someone who defends Klan members, someone who is praised by members of the Klan while being criticized by all of our Democratic allies across the globe. Your money, if you write that check today and you send that into Donald Trump or the Republican National Committee, when they're not distancing themselves from a man who propped up white supremacists and neo-Nazis that killed a young woman this weekend, that will be on you forever. Jon Meacham, at the top of the show, I was talking about how it's been ugly, very ugly at times. We fought a civil war over it. The man who created our founding document, the man that Ken Burns calls the man of the millennium, because he actually did break us away from the idea of a monarchy. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Yes, he did. The father of this country that broke us away from England and helped win the war and helped create what we have had over the past 2.5 centuries. George Washington also owned slaves. But even from that point forward, it has been a march toward equality. America has embraced equality, and it's been a bumpy ride, but it's always been a straight line at the end of the day. What did yesterday do to end 240 years of that?
I think yesterday we realized that if Strom Thurmond or George Wallace had ever made it to the White House, they would actually sound like somebody from Queens, not like somebody from South Carolina or Alabama. White nationalist populism has come to center stage. It's been, Trump marshaled it, he rode it to the White House. And now, you know, one of the things people like us say a lot is, well, you know, he creates a climate. And sometimes that's a bit of a dodge because we want to take somebody's words and connect them to other forces. It's not a dodge here. He has created a climate where people carrying the symbols of the worst regime in the modern world, perhaps in all of history, the Third Reich, are legitimized. Where a former Grand Wizard of the KKK, somebody denounced by George Herbert Walker Bush when he tried to become the governor of Louisiana, a Republican, back when the Republicans meant something, he denounced him. He helped beat him. And now we have a different climate. My other quick thought on this is, one of the things I've been wrestling with is, at what point do the basic Jeffersonian, Madisonian values of the decency of the citizens of the Republic take center stage now? That is, we know essentially now the character, the ways and means of the president. Whereas now incumbent on us, the challenge for all of us now is that a republic is as good as the sum of the parts. And we're the parts. And so now it's our hour to stand against this.
Harold, John Meacham is absolutely right about the climate created by the president. You need do nothing more than watch the Vice News mini documentary that they shot over the weekend in Charlottesville, where they followed white supremacist groups and spent time one-on-one in hotel rooms and vans and really got to the essence of why those people were there. They are energized right now. And this is going to happen again. There's a rally in Boston on Saturday. There's rallies in Berkeley and San Francisco coming up. This is going to happen again because they believe, these groups, they now have cover and a wink from the President of the United States.
Let me try and add. David Duke tweeted yesterday, I was on Nicole's show, tweeted during the show, thanking the President of the United States for his support and thanking him for defending him. The president often calls what happens in the news day fake. Can you imagine, I said yesterday, if the head of the NAACP said, I can imagine what David Duke would say about this. The president would probably say, that's fake news. You have these news stations saying this. David Duke tweeted. The president has not tweeted to refute or to distance himself from David Duke's tweet. 2, I think there are a lot of people who believe they've been tricked this morning. I didn't vote for, to everyone's point, I didn't vote for Donald Trump and would never vote for Donald Trump. But there are a lot of people who said, you know, I want something different. They didn't like Hillary Clinton. They believed that the country was moving in a different direction. And I can't believe that a majority of this country would want a person who supports neo-Nazism, the KKK, white supremacists to be a part of their world and to lead the country. The president draws an equivalency between those who protested neo-Nazis and neo-Nazis. I would say to parents and teachers, as I said yesterday at home, people who don't support them, who are protesting, they support equality. White supremacists believe that they're superior to everyone else. Supremacy, superiority versus equality, there's a big difference. And 3, the president ended his remarks by saying, I support what the mother of that deceased woman, the president says he doesn't need all the facts. There's a person dead from what happened from that rally, from what happened from that awful situation in Charlottesville. That mom said that she didn't necessarily believe or support her, I shouldn't say support, but didn't believe and pursue her daughter's cause. But after her daughter's death, she was not going to be angry. She would pursue that cause. And the president said, at a moment of stress, I can't believe she had that kind of power and compassion and could rise to the moment. Mr. President, rise to the moment. He has not risen to the moment yet. Not only this situation, but any situation. I won't go that far. He's not risen to the moment in many situations as being president.
But Michael Steele, how could he rise
That's
to the
the
moment?
problem.
He hasn't risen to the moment. The moment passed. The moment came Saturday. It came again Monday. It came again yesterday.
Yeah.
It passed. There's no undoing this.
He saw the moment and he ducked, and he continues to duck. And the reality for the country right now is that we have in our face a situation where there's someone who has elevated the hate machines in this country to the level of the presidency, and has created, I think, a false equivalency, but an equivalency nonetheless. And to go to Joe's opening point about, stopping, history in its tracks, not only has that happened, but he is turning it on his heads. Think about how we got to where we are and the journey that it took to get here. The men and women who fought and along that trail, who were the freedom riders, who were the ones who were pushing back against the very same people. The president can't even say, I don't like them, without seeming forced, without seeming that, okay, this is what the script says here, I'll read this, but this is not what I feel. Yesterday was a big middle finger to the country in so many ways by this president, because he said, finally, I'm going to do this my way and tell you exactly what I believe. We now see the man for who he is.
Did David Duke ever support you when you were the head of the Republican Party?
No, thank you.
I want to make sure.
No.
Hallie, you were in the room yesterday when
Yeah.
the president was giving those remarks. The reporting and the comments came almost immediately out of the West Wing staff that said the president went rogue. This was not the plan. The quotes went on and on. The White House staff, it seemed, immediately trying to distance itself from this. Do you see people, as Nicole suggested, walking out today?
So, that's one of the questions that we've been working on overnight is what does this mean for the people inside the West Wing at this point? You didn't have to go far to figure out that people had issues with it. You just had to look to your left where John Kelly was standing.
Yeah.
In the room, it was as wild as it looked on television. We have seen the president in these kinds of settings before, and I think there was a sense among reporters in the room that perhaps he would come down and take questions like he had done at Bedminster on Thursday and Friday when he sort of went back and forth with reporters. But I don't think anybody expected this. Let me tell you what was supposed to happen. He was supposed to come down that elevator, come out, unfurl that piece of paper about infrastructure, give his visual aids, give his talk about policy, and then essentially kind of say, hey, Gary Cohn and Elaine Chao will take your questions. Let me head back upstairs now. Instead, he brought up Mick Mulvaney as they stood sort of next to him, flanking him for 25 minutes as he took questions with reporters. Our reporting, based on multiple sources, both inside and close to the administration, is truly that people were stunned. I don't even know that it was strategy, Willie, of trying to distance themselves. If people were thinking to that level, I think the initial reaction was, what just happened? You have John Kelly, who spent last week at Bedminster trying to institute some of these processes, trying to put in place some structure for this administration, who had apparently laid out this plan to say, go downstairs, do this, do X, do Y. And immediately, the president did instead what he wanted to do in that moment, which was come out and as one person phrased it to me, kind of explain or relitigate what his comments were about on Saturday. Wanted to express that to people. But I'll tell you this, you talk about Elaine Chao, you talk about some of these folks who are with him. I asked Gary Cohn multiple times when he took questions, because after that news conference that we all watched, there was another one. It was during your show, Nicole, and we were sort of listening to you and then also trying to turn to ask these questions of Gary Cohn and Elaine Chao. Cohn multiple times did not respond when asked, do the president's words hurt his agenda? They want to talk about the agenda, but the president's words are stalling that. And Elaine Chao, at one point, I said, what about the comments with Mitch McConnell, your husband? She says, I stand by my man, both of them.
Joe?
Well, one of those men, Mike Barnicle, though, provides aid and comfort to white supremacists. One of those men provides aid and comfort to neo-Nazis. To Klans members. One of those men that she's proudly standing by this morning gets praise from David Duke and criticism from other democratically elected leaders across the United States of America. There is no excuse to stand by that type of man. No excuse whatsoever unless you were so craven for power, unless you so desperately seek status that you are willing to ignore the fact that you are now working for a man who's either a white supremacist or a man who admires white supremacists and neo-Nazis. Mike, the question is, though, what about an honorable man like General Kelly, a man that I know I was relieved went in to be chief of staff, a man who's given his all to this country, a man who has given his son to this country in defense of freedom, in defense of liberty. What does somebody like John Kelly do this morning?
Joe, I can only assume that General Kelly is probably carrying the same cloak of sadness that all of us here at this table feel, that millions of Americans feel today. This is a resilient country. We have survived, gotten up off the floor after assassinations, during wars, after terrorist attacks, after natural disasters. But what happened yesterday was quite different. What happened yesterday, because of the nature of the media and all of the tools we have available to us today, will live forever. And what will live forever? What will you see? You'll see the President of the United States standing before the Republic, diminishing the presidency, the country, and himself. You'll see and remember the President of the United States pouring words like salt on open wounds of race, of class, of gender, of income inequality. You'll see the President of the United States not only diminishing the office, but diminishing himself by misconstruing history, which he certainly has not read and certainly does not understand. And so now we talk about Donald Trump as President of the United States. We talk about Donald Trump, what's going to happen today. What we ought to be talking about is the country and the people who represent the country in Washington, D.C., because now it's up to them. What are they going to do? Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, tweeted last night without mentioning the President's name. Put his name on it, Mr. Speaker. It was the President yesterday. Put his name on it and do something about it.
The Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Republican leaders need to call the President out by name, the way Marco Rubio did yesterday, the way Cory Gardner has done, the way other Republicans have done. It is no longer enough to tweet a 140-character mournful tweet about what the President of the United States has done. You have the power in your position to bend history away from the David Dukes of this world and back towards the people that you grew up respecting and the type of people who made you want to get into public service from the very beginning. That is not this man, John Meacham. And John, if you could, for us, try to put this, if you can, in historical perspective, some historical perspective, and is it like Nixon in '74, a president that's this isolated? Because, you know, conservative writers have been criticizing the president across the weekend. Rupert Murdoch's newspapers, the New York Post this morning, a stinging headline. The Wall Street Journal editorial page has been deeply critical of Donald Trump and his actions in this area. Does this president stand as alone as any president since Richard Nixon?
You know, since Nixon, yes, and I think that Nixon is the only analogy that works in the modern era, because you did have, really into the summer of '74, a pretty significant number of Republicans who believed that Nixon was a victim of a liberal witch hunt. It turns out there was a witch there, and I think that that's that may be what happens here with Trump. The number to watch, obviously, is the national approval number, which I think is down to 34%. I think the disapproval number is around 67. But that number among Republicans, which I think is still pretty high, is the number to watch. And what I don't understand, to go to what you were just talking about, is how Republicans, who basically the party of Lincoln, the party of Eisenhower, the party of Reagan, sold their soul here, or at least have a form of Stockholm syndrome. And they need to break this. And I think that history is going to look extremely kindly on those who have the courage, like John McCain when he defended Barack Obama in 2008. The leaders who stand up and speak out against Trump now will be seen in history as heroes.
And the president has tweeted a couple of times this morning, one about last night's Senate race in Alabama, the primary there, congratulating both Roy Moore and his candidate, the one he endorsed, Luther Strange, who finished second there, saying it's an exciting race. And another tweet going after Amazon, saying it's doing great damage to tax-paying retailers. So the tweets so far from President Trump.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.